But now in 2026, it's been made abundantly clear absolutely no references to God are allowed at any public ceremony. Apparently, the inclusivity of the Canadian Armed Forces requires the exclusion of God. The opening words of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms state that Canada was founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Well, last Wednesday, July 29th, the Commander of Military Personnel Command of the Canadian Armed Forces issued CAF Military Personnel Instructions 0326 regarding spiritual reflections in military settings. Under this stated claim of neutrality, these instructions forbid military chaplains from offering prayers or religious observances at public military events, but instead they are to offer spiritual reflections which are free from religious-specific language, including references to God. This is yet another development in the push for neutrality within the Canadian Armed Forces and Canadian institutions. So we'll go over the history of that. And then the main argument behind this is the charter rights of members and their religious freedom, and how the state's duty of neutrality requires that anyone representing the Canadian Armed Forces, so be that a chaplain or other service member, should refrain from making any references to God or religious language that is unique to their faith tradition. Now, we're going to examine that. There's kind of two different religious freedom arguments going on, and then I'm going to highlight some of the posts that are going around. You often hear claims of misinformation on both sides, and so we'll examine that to see if that's actually the case, and maybe even highlight some of the misinformation on those that are in favor of this instruction. And then the big call to action is that we have a petition that's launched to stand with chaplains that want to be able to pray freely to their God. And we believe that chaplains should be free to acknowledge God as clearly as our own Constitution does, as the Charter of Rights and Freedoms does. So if you agree, we need you to stand with us. Go sign it today and then tell 2 or 3 friends that also stand for religious freedom. So first, a little history. These recently released instructions supersede a previous Chaplain General Directive titled The Chaplain General Direction on Chaplains' Spiritual Reflection in Public Settings. It's from October 11th, 2023, which already mandated inclusive speech sensitive to the diversity of beliefs and faith traditions within the Canadian Armed Forces. And at the time, there was already concerns that this was banning prayer, and the dominant narrative in favor of the directive kept critiquing, conservative members of Parliament and people from the religious right for trying to drive partisan politics, saying there's religious grievance where there is none. And so you had Minister Bill Blair being very clear, asserting that prayer was not being banned in the Canadian Armed Forces. Bishop Scott McKaig of the Military Ordinariate of Canada said that he had spoken with many chaplains at the time, and they were deeply discouraged. He said very discouraged, and he said that morale had been negatively affected. Yet the defense minister said nothing was happening, and Bishop McKaig encouraged chaplains to be patient and wait and see, because they didn't know how things would play out just yet. But now in 2026, it's been made abundantly clear absolutely no references to God are allowed at any public ceremony. Apparently, the inclusivity of the Canadian Armed Forces requires excluding God, the very God that our founding principles recognized. Back in 2023, then Chaplain General J.L.G. Bellil said that the directive was necessary given the Supreme Court of Canada's 2015 Saguenay decision, in which they ruled on an appeal regarding a Quebec municipality which had explicitly Christian prayers during their council meetings, to open their council meetings, as well as Roman Catholic religious symbolism within the council chambers. While the Supreme Court acknowledged that, quote, neither the Quebec Charter nor the Canadian Charter expressly impose a duty of religious neutrality on the state, they still found that the duty of neutrality now existed as a result of, quote, an evolving interpretation of freedom of conscience and religion. So by duty of neutrality, they meant that, quote, the state must neither encourage nor discourage any form of religious conviction whatsoever. The nature of the prayers that they were dealing with in that Supreme Court Saguenay decision were found by the Supreme Court to be discriminatory against the atheist gentleman who had originally filed the complaint. And so this brings the question, when it comes to the state's neutrality, it stems from the charter rights to religious freedom, and it's an evolving argument from that. But the question I asked is religious freedom for who? Two arguments related to religious freedom are at play, especially in defense of this directive that was released last week. The first is that the religious freedom of military service members who do not believe in God or do not define themselves as religious in any way is being violated by the use of prayers and religious specific language such as references to God. So this assumes that religious freedom is a negative right. A negative right, the right to never see or hear public religious expression with which one disagrees, at least coming from the state or by members that serve in public institutions. However, by prioritizing a non-believer's desire to not hear things from public officials that they don't agree with, the government is compelling believers that are in these public positions to commit a positive sin of omission. For the Christian, to not honor God as God or give thanks to Him is a violation of conscience. And it's the very error that Paul condemns in Romans 1. Forbidding the mention of God in public ceremonies effectively suppresses the truth in unrighteousness. The removal of God's name does not create a neutral space. Rather, it establishes practical atheism as the mandatory official expression of the Canadian Armed Forces. To pray to God in an official public setting on these terms violates the blasphemy laws of state-enforced secular humanism. And that's the issue here. And some of the critiques, they acknowledge it. They say, we're not banning prayer, we're just doing what I just described. The second argument related to religious freedom is that no one's religious freedom is violated because these instructions only apply to the official settings, and service members and chaplains are still free to practice their religion in, quote, private conversations, counseling, within faith-specific gatherings, or in their spiritual roles, such as leading religious or spiritual rites, milestones, ceremonies, regular weekly worship, or gatherings. Now, thanks be to God that those settings are still allowed. They're not banning it in those situations. Chaplains are still free to counsel service members that come to them from their own stated faith tradition. They don't have to be neutral in that situation, which is good. What's interesting about this argument is that it actually cuts both ways. If practical atheism and vague spirituality are, as they argue, do not violate the freedom of religion of monotheistic chaplains and service members, then it would follow that a monotheistic service member praying to God publicly at a Remembrance Day ceremony would not violate the religious freedom or freedom for irreligion of an atheist. Spiritual, agnostic, and atheist service members would still be free to disbelieve and would not be compelled to say amen at a ceremony, and it wouldn't change what they need to do in their private conversations or their daily activities. If a Christian chaplain can tolerate practical atheism or vague spirituality at a Remembrance Day ceremony, then the atheist can tolerate a Christian chaplain praying to God. The sterilization of publicly acceptable speech is not a move towards tolerance. In fact, it's a catering towards the opposite. Therefore, the religious freedom of non-believing members, by the very logic that justifies this instruction, is not violated when a chaplain or other service member prays to God in a public military ceremony. Religious freedom protected by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms does protect an atheist's freedom of non-religion. However, it should not be reinterpreted to protect individuals from hearing the religious expression of others in a public ceremony, particularly when such individuals are praying and recognizing the very God that our founding principles recognize. So you're going to see there's misleading posts like this. Everyone talks about the uproar. We're just creating a bunch of hysteria. It's often the accusation that's thrown around in 2023. And when it was brought up again in 2025, the claim is, the conservatives are just, causing outrage, saying that prayer is being banned. But now you literally can't mention God today, and yet they're still towing the same line that prayer is not being banned. And so here you see, I'm not sure how to say this gentleman's name, the Rev. Piotr. He says there seemed to be an uproar about the recent document from CAF, Canadian Armed Forces, regarding certain functions of chaplain. And it's this Personnel Instructions 0326. It is interpreted as banning religion or banning prayer or even banning God. Okay, so he's saying it's interpreted as banning religion, banning prayer, or even banning God. But watch how he switches the context within which we're critiquing this. First, there's no evidence that Canada has banned God from the military. I don't think I've seen any posts regarding the issue of these new instructions where people are saying, oh no, they're banning God from the military. For one, Clint highlighted that that's not, when we use that language, we're implying that the military is able to ban God, but they're not. That's the mention of God. However, we're not arguing for that. And so then he establishes, he kind of mischaracterizes the opposition. And then he says military chaplains have not been abolished, religious services continue to exist, and service members remain free to practice their faith. Praise God that those things are still in place. And then he says it's at issue is the state ceremonies. So he's making this misleading and make it sound like the outrage or the critiques that are being posted are not even understanding the issues, when really we are understanding the issue. The issue is the banning of chaplains being able to recognize the very God that our founding principles recognize, as the Charter says, in public ceremonies. And his third paragraph is also misleading. He says, second, the Charter protects freedom of religion, but it does not guarantee that every government ceremony must include explicitly religious language. I have also yet to see anybody arguing that every government ceremony must include explicitly religious language in order to comply with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's preposterous. I think every government ceremony should. That would be a good thing, but that's not what we're arguing. That's not what's been argued as far as this issue and what the Canadian Charter allows. Rather, what we're arguing is that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms doesn't prohibit chaplains from expressing their faith or in their religion in official state ceremonies. Supreme Court even states that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms does not expressly impose a duty of religious neutrality on the state. So the Supreme Court even says that the Charter doesn't impose this neutrality. It actually is a development. It's the ongoing evolution. Another mischaracterization here is they commented on my post, and then I saw they were commenting on most of the posts that were decrying these instructions. And so the Rotary Club of Victoria, they stated, there's no ban on references to God. The chaplains branch is comprised of adherents to many faiths. There are rabbis, imams, priests, and ministers. While each are of different doctrine, they are duty-bound to minister to people of their faith, of other faiths, and of no faith. And that's the way it's been for some time. But this is explicitly wrong. It's explicitly wrong. The instructions 326, which we will look at here, 326, they state in 4.2, for all events connected to official government business, such as a military ceremony or commemorative event, where CAF members are expected or mandated to attend, and prayers or religious observances have been requested, chaplains must instead offer a spiritual reflection. So what that's saying is when, say it's at a military parade, but it's also not limited to graduation parades, ship commissionings, ribbon cuttings, festive seasonal or mess dinners. So like say they're having a Christmas dinner, which you can bet wouldn't be called a Christmas dinner. I'm just assuming that. At any of these events, if they are requested to come and provide prayers or religious observances, they must instead offer spiritual reflection. So don't offer prayers. You must instead offer spiritual reflection. And in definitions too, it is clear that spiritual reflections do not use religious-specific language, including references to God. So, they are not allowed, if they've been asked to come and pray to God for blessing on the meal or something like that, they are not to pray. Instead, they are only allowed, they must, compelled to offer spiritual reflections that don't mention God. And so for the Rotary Club to say there's no ban on references to God, that is very misleading. Very misleading. So they also posted here, they're citing 4.9 from the instructions, which let's look at it on the actual page. So 4.9 says, historical customs and traditions. Certain religious customs and prayers have been passed down through Canadian military history, providing comfort and purpose throughout the life of a service or unit. And so this is a long-standing tradition, which also speaks to the historic religious practices and roots within the Canadian Armed Forces. While these prayers and religious customs connect presently serving members of the past, providing a continuity of tradition, religious customs and prayers themselves cannot be imposed on anyone as a condition of service. Which, making people pray them, that's fair. However, I wonder if when the Rotary Club of Victoria, who was managing their Twitter account, read this, they looked at this and said, oh, look, see, these are still being allowed. There's a provision here. If commanders deem it important for their members to learn the service, members to be required to learn about them. So see, in an educational context, you can still learn about these. But I think they missed what this says. The provision is that members can be required to learn about these prayers and customs and traditions in an educational context, not during a military ceremony. So right here, it's clear. Members would then understand the historic custom of reciting the prayer, and they're not being asked to participate in, agree with, or believe in the prayer. So it's not in a military ceremony. And so that's the concern. It's good news. Many people are confused about this. Military and state funerals are exempted, and so it is okay for a chaplain to attend a military or state funeral. They recognize that this is a blended ceremony of military drill and ritual along with faith traditions and also the family's wishes. And so it's good to see they did not ban it there. My original picture when I posted about this on Facebook on the weekend, I'd read this, but then when I went to get a picture, I found a good picture of them carrying a casket with a Canadian flag on it, and I thought, oh, that's a good picture. But it was misleading because that's not what is banned. Funerals are still good to go. And Rotary Club is acknowledging that the chaplain's still free to have their personal beliefs and to provide spiritual or religious care according to their stated faith tradition. And so that's good, but that's still a red herring. But yeah, so stay tuned. We're hoping to release more videos as we engage with this issue. As I said at the beginning, we believe that military chaplains should be free, even at public ceremonies, to acknowledge God and the supremacy of God as clearly as our Charter of Rights and Freedoms does, as clearly as our national anthem does, and as clearly as the walls on our parliament buildings do. And so if you agree, we need you to stand with us. Go sign the petition. It'll take 20 seconds, and invite 3 friends to do the same. God bless you, and may the Lord have mercy on our country. Take care.